cashless or cash light society is actually a goal that we should be reaching towards?
We think it is one goal, but it's one among many, and perhaps we value the cashless or digital financial services not so much for its own sake, although it does have value because cash is inconvenient, it's dirty, it's unsafe, it has its own sets of problems. It's hard to transport over distance. But we think more importantly, switching from cash to digital will allow us to do many more different kinds of services that aren't possible in a cash economy. So there's both the displacement of cash for its own sake, but I'd like to say that the bigger case to be made would be because we could then begin to offer services that aren't even conceivable today, if we can reach people digitally.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot about bundling of different services. For example, bundling maybe agriculture information with financial services like a microinsurance product. Do you feel like that's a direction we should be going in? Is that a way to keep customers on board, loyalty? What kind of value does that add?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there are really divergent points of view on that. In some purists in the financial services believe that every product ought to stand on its own and be valued on its own, and that's really gives the best set of choices to the consumer, because they can pick which ones they want and not take the others. The providers, banks, telecom, others, say, well, if I get two products, I can reduce the price on both, or I can do something differently that I couldn't do before. So there's a little bit of give and take in that whole equation. I think we'd be agnostic. We'd want to come out where the value is greatest for the end client. But which of those it is, there are sometimes trade-offs, bundling and leaving things alone or on their own.
Interesting. Have you seen any good examples where it has worked or perhaps has been tried and hasn't?
The example that comes to mind for me is an organization called KGFS in India, which offers 15 products, none of them bundled. Each one can be sought and acquired on its own. And therefore that organization feels it can learn much more about what clients' true preferences are and needs are by unbundling them and learning which ones they take up. So that would be the one that comes to mind the most.
Can I ask what some of those 15 products are that they offer separately?
Yeah, I mean, they are in some ways quite products that you would know pretty conventionally. There'd be a few different credit products. One would be a loan you could get against your gold savings very quickly, same day. Walk in, give a bit of jewelry, you can borrow. There'd be a microcredit loan. You form a small group, you come into their office, you get a credit. Then there would be some traditional savings products. There would be a pension scheme where you can contribute towards your old age. So there's a whole range of these kinds of things that they do. It's very interesting.
Yeah, neat. Okay. Another question about onboarding new clients. There's been some examples of aid agencies onboarding clients when they do like a cash for work kind of scheme after an emergency or post-conflict, that kind of thing. Do you feel like that's an interesting method to get people on board? Has that worked in the past?
Yeah, it's a great idea, and in theory and in practice, we should try and find a way to make it work, because that interaction is an opportunity to bring them in. The issue that we faced is by pulling them in, giving them an account, and starting the service, people don't often find value once they've been brought into the service. So we can't assume that they would find it useful. So we really have to be ready for them to come in, but then to provide them value beyond just this one handout or just some subsidy or some short-term. Now there are government programs now, Brazil, India, other places where there's more permanent cash transfer, and increasingly those are trying to be tied to coming through a formal bank account and then linked to some savings products or places where people can build up assets. But those government programs are more permanent than the emergency response.
Sure, yeah. Here's kind of a more general question. what gets you really excited about mobile money and financial inclusion? And when you wake up and you go to work every day, you're just psyched to work on it.
I think it's the idea that if we get things right amid this opportunity, that those 2 billion plus 2.5 billion people who wake up, even if we just affect all their lives in some very small way, it will add up to great things. And I think that fixing some of the globe's problems does require some solutions at scale that don't cost us anything additional. These are all solutions in financial inclusion that are win-wins for the providers and the clients, and therefore should not cost us any more tax money, should not cost, so there's a win-win in all of that. And I think if we get things right, that opportunity sits in front of us in the next decade or two. And if I can play some very small role in that, that's what gets me up in the morning.
One more question. Can you share some thoughts about, we talked earlier about mimicking informal behaviors in financial lives and mimicking those in the technology that we use. Can you talk about what some of those behaviors are that we could potentially mimic through technology?
Yeah, there is the, I think the one that we perhaps don't think about enough is this sort of, there's this practice in some very poor households of setting aside a handful of rice. And I think about that for every meal, the mother or the whoever's cooking would take a handful and put it into a special jar. And that's just to save up for a rainy day.
Yeah.
And for her, that has some purpose, some future. Well, why does it have to be rice? Why couldn't she take every little small bit of cash that she has at the end of the day, put it into a locked account that's set aside for a special purpose? So that'd be the kind of thing that we could mimic with a financial product, and that has value because it can be accumulated. Mm-hmm. It may not spoil. There are other benefits to digitizing that.
Right, and it mimics her behavior and planning for the future.
It already fits in her life. Right. We're just taking it from rice to zeros and ones inside a computer somewhere.
Right.